Hello, guys. Today I'm having the great pleasure to talk to one of my heroes, Jeff Zeig. Jeff, I can't explain enough what he means and how he's amazing. Hello, Jeff.
Hello. Well, thank you so much. Very, very kind.
Thank you very much.
Infelizmente, no falo português. I have a great affinity, a great appreciation for Brazil. And I have been traveling to Brazil for more than 20 years to teach. I've seen a lot of Brazil, and my stepdaughter and my ex-wife are Brazilian. My ex-wife was born in Sao Paulo, and my stepdaughter, who just got married on Sunday, was from BH.
Great, great. And wow, I remember that you came, I don't know, 1 or 2 years ago to deliver a training on Ericksonian coaching.
Yes.
It was a great training, great training.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to tell you later in the program that is now available and people can now stream that. So when we get into the program, I'll talk more about that. Also more about streaming Milton Erickson, because I'm sure your viewers would not only enjoy learning something about Ericksonian coaching, but they would also enjoy seeing Milton Erickson.
Yes, of course. But before we start, I would like to hear from you about your background. How did you first met Dr. Milton Erickson? And sure. How did you become the founder of the Milton Erickson Foundation?
Sure, of course. Thank you so much. Well, I became a psychologist, really a marriage and family counselor in 1974. So I was in a training program from 1971 to 1973. And in my training program, getting my master's degree, mestrado, I was introduced to hypnosis. And that became something that was really interesting to me. How could you use hypnosis to help people more effectively? How could you use hypnosis to help people more deeply? How could you help people to access some of the resources that they have? And it seemed like hypnosis was a super highway to be able to accomplish those things. So curiously, I asked one of my teachers, I say, okay, now what do you read? And he said to me, read Milton Erickson. I said, who? Because I had not heard the name. Now, there was only one book that was really available, which was a collection of his papers. Now there's more than 100 books that are directly or centrally about Milton Erickson. And I started reading his papers and I went, wow, because this was so different from what I was learning in school about counseling human beings. And Erickson's remarkable effectiveness, his remarkable way of thinking intrigued me, and I wanted to learn. So I wrote a postcard, a very simple postcard to my cousin. And she was studying nursing in Tucson, Arizona, which is only about 1.5 hour drive from Phoenix, where Milton Erickson lived. And I said, I just started studying hypnosis, and if you ever go to Phoenix, you should visit Milton Erickson. He's a genius. At the time, I was living in Northern California. And my cousin wrote me back, and she said, don't you remember my old roommate, Roxana Erickson? And my cousin had, in her college years, had gone to Mexico, and they were studying some anthropology, and she met Roxana, and then I met Roxana in around 1970. I hadn't remembered. I remembered that my cousin said, you know, Roxana's father is a famous psychiatrist. But I wasn't so interested in psychiatry in 1970. Mm-hmm. So I wrote to Erickson because as a young psychologist, and the idea that you could study with a master. Now, there's certain things that you can learn on the internet. You can learn mathematics on the internet. You can learn chemistry on the internet. But you can't really learn human relations in a profound way without having a direct master.
Mhm.
And so to me, when I wrote to Milton Erickson and I said, can I please study with you? Can I please visit with you? Be in your presence? And he said, okay. Now that was, I could still feel a chill on my arm, remembering the moment that he wrote back to me, and he personalized a letter to an admiring student. I was just a nobody. I was finished my master's program and beginning my career as a psychologist and a counselor and a coach. And Erickson wrote in that letter, when you read my work, presupposing that I would, don't pay attention to the techniques, to the wording of suggestions. The really important thing is motivation for change, and the fact that no human being ever fully knows his own capabilities. Now, I must have read that line 15 times. I was stunned that this genius was personalizing a letter to an admiring student. So in December of 1973, I traveled to Phoenix from Northern California to spend 3 days with Milton Erickson. And actually, the transcript of that and some introductory chapters is in a book. And that book is translated into Portuguese, a teaching seminar with Milton Erickson. But that book is a little difficult to get. I may be able to help people, and we can talk about that later in the program, how people might be able to get that book. So what I encountered, now, I thought I was coming to learn from this genius. I was going to learn hypnosis. I was going to get all of these technical skills. I was going to learn how to do things using paradox. You know, at that time, the word reframing did not exist in the vocabulary of counselors. It was not something that was commonly done. And this is before Bandler and Grinder came to Erickson, and they were very important in popularizing Erickson. Ernest Rossi came to Erickson the year before I did, and he was Erickson's Boswell. By that idiom, I mean he was the person who wrote the most about Milton Erickson.
I'm sorry,
collected
who was it?
corpus of Erickson's knowledge. Ernest Rossi.
Okay.
So Ernest Rossi Ernest Rossi came to Erickson as a Jungian therapist in 1972. And he and Erickson connected, and Rossi is a very good writer, and they wrote four important books together, which is Erickson teaching Rossi how do you do hypnosis, how do you do hypnotic counseling, hypnotic psychotherapy. And these books are in Spanish. I don't think that these books are in Portuguese. Maybe they are. But if somebody really wanted to learn about hypnosis, this is the best place to begin. Then Rossi also collected Erickson's writings. So the Erickson Foundation that I direct publishes 16 volumes, a collector's edition, of all of Erickson's writing. And he was a great writer. And so those people who really want to live the Erickson world, immerse themselves in the Erickson world, discover about Erickson's intellectual contribution, there's a lot available in his writing. There's also the people like me and others who have written about Erickson, but Erickson was the best expert on Erickson. So in 1973, when I go to visit Erickson, I encounter a man who is so physically frail, so weak, that I thought, perhaps he would die the next day. He had polio when he was 17, and then residuals of polio were terrible, pain and limitation. When I met him in 1973, he was confined to a wheelchair. For a fraction of a moment, he could painfully push himself from his wheelchair and drop into his office chair. He couldn't use his legs. He couldn't support himself. In order to use his right hand, he had to pull his right hand with his left hand. For example, he was eating and he would spoon something, he'd have to use his body. He was breathing by virtue of half a diaphragm and a few intercostal muscles to work to breathe. His vision was double. His hearing was impaired. He could not wear false teeth, denture. He couldn't wear denture. He had to, this was a man who had an actor's voice. He had to relearn how to speak. Well, within 5 minutes, 10 minutes of being in his presence, there were tears that started to well up in my eyes. I came to learn a technique of how to do therapy. And what he was talking with me about is how to be the best Jeff Zeig. And he was one of those people who vindicated the earth by his presence in the planet. He was a person like Mother Teresa. He was not interested in money. And I'm writing his biography right now. There's another website that people could look at, ericksonbiography.com, and see a little more information about Erickson. And this biography, I hope I'll finish it next year, because he was a tremendous intellectual contributor. And what I encountered in Erickson was not a technician. That's what I thought I was going to visit. I'd talk with somebody about technique. But what I encountered was the most complete human being that I have ever met. Somebody who was just so attentive, so present, so interested in me, so precise, so incredibly humanistically loving. Well, that wasn't just me, that was who he was. This man was curious and interested in people. And so within the first the first hours that I was with him, I didn't care about learning technique. I just wanted to see how he mastered life. Because if you came to Erickson with pain, well, he probably had more pain than you did. If you came to Erickson with limitations, well, he probably had more limitations than you did. And he was laughing all the time. And life was extremely funny to him. And he was so amused by the human predicament and could even laugh at his own discomfort, laugh at his own limitations. So I wanted to spend as much time with him as I possibly could, just because being in the presence of somebody like that, it makes you want to be a better person. I just wanted to be a better Jeff Zeig, because moment to moment, I saw him struggling to be the best Milton Erickson. And so that's what I really want to communicate in my teaching. Now, so many people come to seminars because they want to learn methods. Teach me reframing, teach me how to use hypnotic suggestion, teach me how to use conversational hypnosis. But that was really not the essence of Erickson. The essence of Erickson was that he was a people builder. He was helping people to be the best human being that they could be. And the techniques were not something that he was especially interested in explaining or categorizing. Shall I continue?
Yes, of course.
Okay. So Erickson was an essentially experiential teacher. He was not a left hemisphere teacher. He was not giving didactic information. I was his student for more than 6 years intermittently. Excuse me, in 1978, 2 years before he died, I moved to Phoenix explicitly to be closer to Erickson. And over that time, he never, as in never, explained to me how to do hypnosis. He never explained to me how to use his famous techniques, the confusion technique, the interspersal technique. He never explained those things to me. 100% of the time, he was being experiential. And what I mean by that gesture is he was giving me experiences, hypnosis, stories, metaphors, tasks, symbolic assignments. riddles, games. And all of these experiences were to help me to be a better Jeff Zeig and not just to develop my left hemisphere. And I had never, ever encountered someone who was 100%, no exaggeration, 100% experiential. So if you asked him a didactic question, he could talk about a case, he could tell a story, he could do hypnosis, and immediately you were involved in the experiential world. Now let's understand that. If you want to learn physics, you read a book and you can learn physics. If you want to be happy in life, there is no book that explains 1, 2, 3, 4, now you're happy. And so happiness, motivation, curiosity, presence, these are all things that are experiential states, and they're not states that can be achieved through a simple mathematical algorithm. And what Erickson was interested in was helping people to have flexible access to effective states. What are the states that you need in any given situation, and how can you use the resourcefulness that exists in your history to be adaptive? So Erickson was experiential. I'm there. It's December 5th of 1973. Erickson comes into the office. Now, he's not popular at this time. It's only me and Erickson. And so he comes into the office. He pushes himself off of his office chair. He painfully flops into his wheelchair. He painfully arrives in his office chair. He looks to the floor and he starts telling me a story that he was in the city of New Orleans. And this city is known for its cuisine, excellent food in New Orleans. And he said that he went to a restaurant and he ordered 24 raw oysters. Okay, now he eats the oysters and then he orders 1/3 raw oysters. Now this is very unusual. No individual eats 36 raw oysters. But when he finished them, he ordered another dozen. Now he's eaten 48 raw oysters. The waiter is stunned because this is so unusual. But when he finishes the 48, he orders a 5th dozen oysters. When the waiter brings the oysters, the waiter is completely beside himself. He doesn't know how to understand this. And Erickson looks up at the man and he says, 60 oysters for 60 birthdays. And I say, happy birthday, Dr. Erickson. It was his 72nd birthday. Now, his way of telling me that it was his birthday was not saying, it's my birthday today. He was giving me a little experience so that I could realize that it was his birthday. So, and I think he was just practicing at the moment, being experiential rather than being didactic. And he enjoyed this, and he wanted people to get this idea of how to help people realize being in effective states. When I left 1973, and I'm leaving and I'm thinking, oh, I just, don't know what to do. He's clearly not going to charge me a penny. He didn't charge anything. And he didn't charge Bandler and Grinder, and he didn't charge Gilligan, and he didn't charge Dilks. He was not interested in people's money. I didn't have any money then. I just finished my degree. I would have paid him anything. I had no idea how I was going to pay him. And he didn't charge. It was this tradition that if you have something, you give it to the people who you believe can use it. So I found a carving, a wood carving. And those of you who go to the Ericksonbiography.com website would see the wood carving. It was a duck. And Erickson loved wood carvings. He was a wood carver. He was a good wood carver. He enjoyed carving wood. So I gave him a wood carving. The duck is driftwood from the ocean. And the neck and the head are stained and sanded, and they look like the neck and the head of a duck. The base is just raw wood, but abstractly it looks like the body of a duck. So I give him the duck. And I'm leaving, and I didn't even wrap it. And he looks at me carefully, thoughtfully, and he looks at the duck. And then he looks at me very thoughtfully, very carefully, smiling, intense as he was. And then he looks at the duck. And then he looks at me, and then he looks at the duck, and he says, emerging. Now the head and the neck of the duck was emerging from the raw base. I was emerging as a man. Now, I thought I was giving him tailoring. I was tailoring something to his interests. And he gave me back utilization. But everything was an experience. Everything was a drama. The utilization skills of this man were so highly developed that it was a state that he was in. I was watching a video just the other day. And it's 1977. A German friend of mine who was staying with me and visiting Erickson, a psychologist in Germany, was doing some of the early videotaping of Erickson. And this man is a therapist. He's working with a couple, and he wants to get supervision from Erickson. So the problem with the couple was that the man had lost sexual interest in the wife. And the wife had scoliosis. In other words, her spine was curving, and she was becoming smaller. The therapist believed that the scoliosis was the primary reason that the husband had lost sexual interest. And he presented the case to Erickson. Erickson, a farm boy, practical, not theoretical, immediately says, well, if I would have had that patient, I would have said to the man, women love curves. Men will love curves. Men really love curves. Men are designed to love curves. Men are biologically built to love curves. So this was, again, this philosophy of alchemy. How can you take straw and immediately spin it into gold? And for all of the techniques that have been categorized, it's not Erickson. Erickson was intently present, completely humanistic in his interest. And if you were motivated, he was there for you. If you were playing games, he had no time for you. And he was very perceptive about recognizing the people who he would invest in, and was very quick to dismiss the people who he really thought were not there for the best reasons. So he was discriminating, but when he saw something that he liked, he developed it. So in 1978, I was living in Phoenix, and I wanted to say thank you. So I said, I want to organize a Congress in your honor in December of 1980 to coincide with your 79th birthday. It'll be a birthday present, but I also knew it would be something for him to look forward to, an opportunity to see his friends one more time. I would have coordinated with his 80th birthday, but I didn't think that he was going to get there. And so finally, like I said to him in March, here's my proposal for organizing a Congress. We sat on it. At the end of March, I said, here's my proposal. It's Congress. He sat on it. April, I asked twice. He sat on it. Finally, in May, when I had proved my motivation, he said, okay. And we organized the first Erickson Congress for December 1980. Unfortunately, Dr. Erickson died in March of 1980. But at that time, 750 people were registered. And because 750 people had never been to a hypnosis conference before, it was clearly a success. More than 2,000 people came. And for decades, that was the largest conference ever held on hypnosis until two recent hypnosis conferences that had over 2,000 people in Germany and then 3 years later in Paris. So that's where the Erickson Foundation happened. Dr. Erickson, Mrs. Erickson, myself, and my then wife were the board of directors. It was the financial arm to create the first Congress. And from that, we created the Erickson Foundation, which now organizes not only things about Erickson. The Erickson Foundation organizes a couples conference this May. We're bringing together great experts on relationship, marriages, partnerships. We have a couples conference every spring. We've been doing this since 1997. We organize a brief therapy conference that brings together experts in NLP and psychoanalysis and group therapy. And our premier conference is called The Evolution of Psychotherapy, by far my best professional idea, which was in 1985, I brought together the leading experts in all different fields of psychotherapy. Carl Rogers, Virginia Satir, Bruno Bettelheim, Rollo May, Jay Haley, Joseph Wolpe, Tim Beck. This list, if you're a psychotherapist, is the people who you've learned about who have created psychotherapy in the 20th century. And because Dr. Erickson was not interested in school, he didn't want Ericksonian therapy. The word Ericksonian therapy first appeared in print, I think, when I publicized the first Congress in 1978. There was no, maybe the concept exists, but it was never in print, Ericksonian therapy, to my knowledge. And so we started the Erickson Foundation, but the Erickson Foundation is about effectiveness in counseling, effectiveness in psychotherapy. What are the commonalities that underlie effective clinical work? Now, one of the things that will be of interest to your viewers is that we are now streaming. The Erickson Foundation has a remarkable archive, incredible archive of historical videos. And so if you go to Erickson-foundation.org, and I hope that you'll put that on the screen for your viewers, Erickson-foundation.org, and you'll see that we're streaming the best production video of Milton Erickson called The Artistry of Milton Erickson. And because it's our first offering, I think through April, but it might be over. Even then, it'll be still pretty inexpensive, that people can see Dr. Erickson and they can get a feel for the kind of human being he was, also learn something about his remarkable technical expertise. And then I have another site, which is psychotherapyvideo.com, psychotherapyvideo.com. And I am making available to your viewers at a special offering the coaching workshop that I did in Brazil. And that is with consecutive translation into Portuguese. That's a 4-day workshop. You would have paid $1,000 to attend that workshop at the time. But now I'm making that available on psychotherapyvideo.com, and your viewers will be able to get my 4-day coaching workshop if they with consecutive Portuguese translation. So there's a lot of material for those people who become enthusiastic. And what I'm hoping that happens by virtue of our discussion, my monologue, not really a discussion, is that people become interested in who Erickson was and not just the remarkable technical expertise, because as expert as you are, if you don't have the heart, you're missing 51% of the power. And you can, and fortunately from Erickson, we can learn about the heart of change and not just about the techniques of change.
Great,
okay,
great.
How are we doing?
Well, and I really don't want to talk. I'm loving to hear, and you really embed, you really embrace the Milton Erickson heart and style. You give these experiences, and when you talk, wow, I was entranced here.
Great.
and
Uh-huh.
and what I would like to know now is about the difference between classical hypnosis and Ericksonian hypnosis. You talked a lot about Ericksonian, and I know people still have preconcepts about hypnosis, thinks that it's for manipulating people and make people do wrong things or against their will. And we know it's not. But if you can differentiate classical and Ericksonian hypnosis.
Yes. Well, a little bit like an actor gets typecast. So sometimes an actor gets into a role and that's who he is and he will never be anyone else. Those of you who would watch Star Trek would know that the character of Spock was Spock. And he wasn't Leonard Nimoy. And even though Leonard Nimoy was an accomplished actor that could do many roles, he was always Spock. Well, unfortunately, hypnosis has been similarly typecast as this magical incantation that allows a charismatic operator to do things to a very passive subject. So in theatrical hypnosis that you would see at a carnival, the hypnotist is making the subject search on the floor for his belly button, or making the person sing in a very strange way. So, but that has nothing to do with hypnosis. That's a show where people are expected to behave in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And then in classical hypnosis, the direction of the hypnosis is outside in. And it's a model that I like to call a garbage can model. The hypnotist takes out the garbage and puts in new suggestions, as if the hypnotist is saying, cigarettes will taste bad, cigarettes will smell bad, or you will be comfortable in an airplane. So the direction of the hypnosis in classical trance is outside in, that the suggestions come from this external power of the hypnotist to the subject. In writing Erickson's biography now, I can't even list all of the ways that he changed hypnosis. The ways that he changed psychotherapy were equally profound. But Erickson really taught himself hypnosis. He didn't have a teacher. He invented what hypnosis is like from an Ericksonian perspective. And to Erickson, the hypnosis was inside out. You're stimulating into play resources that the person has not previously realized. In other words, somebody could come to me who is a public speaker. They're an incredible speaker, a motivator, but they can't get into an airplane. Now, in one context, this person has remarkable power. But in another context, this person is behaving as if they have no resources. So what Erickson was doing with hypnosis is helping people to reconnect the resources, the adaptive states that they have, and bring them into center stage. Effectively, whereas in the media, we think about hypnosis as putting people to sleep, Erickson was using hypnosis to wake people up to the potentials that they have and to help them have an experiential realization. Of course you can. Of course you can change. Of course you can cope adequately with your situation. And when you went to see him, because of his infirmities, the room was perfumed with the essence, the aura of course you can. And the deterministic power of that ambience, of that aura, was so great, and it was intentionally crafted. Erickson was a very intentional person, and he was so incredibly precise. He knew what he was doing. You know, he didn't necessarily explain it, because what's the difference between heaven and hell? The difference between heaven and hell is that in heaven, they tell jokes. In hell, they explain them. And Erickson was one of those people who, if you could do it, just do it. And other people, if they can't do it, they teach and they explain. And Erickson would just do it. And you would be immersed in this incredible hypnotic ambience, but it wasn't like watch the watch or the spinning disc. It was seamlessly introducing a kind of conversational trance that would help people to get into a different state. So for example, when patients come to me, they're in a state that's ineffective. They're limited, they're uncomfortable, they're withdrawn, for example. And what we want to do is to help people to get into a more adaptive, constructive state. And hypnosis is an experiential method. Hypnosis is not a way of giving information. You don't use hypnosis because you want to explain things to people. You use hypnosis because you want them to give them an example. You can change your state. And so Erickson was using hypnosis in ways that he called naturalistic. Like even though only 15% of the time did he actually put people into formal trance, 100% of the time he was taking orientations from hypnosis and bringing them into the foreground of the human interaction, because he was interested in helping people to be the best that they could be and not just to understand.
Great.
Okay?
And
Something else.
Yes, you talked about conversational hypnosis, and it's funny how the greatest hypnotist on earth used just 15% of the cases the formal trance, and it was so effective to just talk and deliver the message. And I would like you to share your story about when you stopped smoking. You talked about smoking. How did you happen?
Sure.
How did
it was very fun, and it's a great illustration of a case from Erickson. So I'm at this time I'm in my doctoral program, and I'm teaching introductory psychology as part of my training. I have my own class, and I'm smoking a pipe. And I think this is, very sophisticated, and I'm the young psychologist pipe smoker. And I have European pipes, and I have a pipe rack, and I have a silver lighter, and my special blend of tobacco, and my leather tobacco pouch, and it's a hobby. I am a pipe smoker. And so I'm sitting in Erickson's garden because I don't even remember exactly how it happened. I had no money. And so Erickson had a small guest house, a small bedroom. And because I had no money, Mrs. Erickson would come to the airport and pick me up. I didn't have a taxi fare. And then I would stay at Erickson's home. So I'm in the garden. I'm smoking my pipe. Dr. Erickson is wheeled past me. He sees that I'm smoking a pipe. And then he sees a patient, and then it's my turn. And Erickson begins by telling me a story. And it's about a friend of his who was a pipe smoker. And the friend was awkward because he didn't know where in his mouth to put the pipe. Should he put the pipe in the center of his mouth, 1 millimeter to the left? Should he put it 1 centimeter to the right? He was awkward. And the friend was awkward because he didn't know how to hold the pipe. Should he hold it with his thumb and his forefinger? Should he grasp it with his hand? Should he hold it so that it was pointing outward? Should he hold it that it was pointing inward? He was awkward. And the friend was awkward because he didn't know how to blow out the smoke. Should he blow the smoke up? Should he blow the smoke to the left? Should he blow the smoke in a diffuse stream, in a very focused stream? He was awkward. I'm thinking, I've been smoking pipe for a couple of years. Why is he telling me this story? I'm not awkward. And he's going on. The friend was awkward because he doesn't know how to put the tobacco in. Should he use his finger? Should he use a pencil? Should he use a pipe tool? He's awkward. And the friend is awkward because he doesn't know how to light the pipe. Should the tobacco touch should the flame touch the tobacco? Should it be in front of the tobacco? Should it be in the back of the tobacco? He's awkward. The friend is awkward because he doesn't know how to light the pipe. Should he use a stick match? Should he use a lighter? Should it be a gas lighter? Should it be a wick lighter? He's awkward. I'm being quick. I swear to you, this story went on for 1 hour. Now, sometime in that hour, I believe, knowing Erickson as I do now, I went, and then the story stopped. Now, 2 days later, I was driving home, again to Northern California, before I moved to Phoenix. So it must have been 1977, because I moved to Phoenix in 1978, probably 1977. And I stopped at a stoplight halfway between Phoenix and where I was living in California. And I said to myself at that moment, I don't want to smoke a pipe. I had no desire to smoke a pipe. Consciously, I didn't want to smoke a pipe. Unconsciously, I didn't want to smoke a pipe. And it was my decision. It was my initiative. I stopped. There was no withdrawal. I didn't want to smoke the pipe anymore. That was it. Now, what Erickson did is he didn't change the problem. What he did was he changed the emotional background. He kept on going pipe, awkward, awkward. And as a young man at that time, the last thing in the world that I wanted to do was to look awkward. But also, Erickson used my conscious mind against my unconscious mind. Because now, when I picked up the pipe, I didn't know what to do with it. I became so hyper conscious that I didn't know where to put it in my mouth or how to hold it or where to put it down or how to put the tobacco in, because I became so conscious about all of the intricate steps. And what he did was, pipe smoking was in my procedural memory. It's like putting on your shoes. You don't think about it. You just do it. It's a procedure. And he brought pipe smoking back into my working memory. Now, if I have to think about speaking Portuguese, eu falo português, I have to think, what is I? How do you say speak? Okay, Portuguese. So I have that now learning a language. Right now I'm studying Spanish. Learning a language, I have to learn how to use the pronouns in Spanish. This is in my working memory, and I have to think. But I'm waiting for the moment when it just falls into my procedural memory. So he took something out of procedural memory and made it working memory. He used he used a conscious pattern to solve an unconscious habit. And that was so simple. Plus, he never, ever, never asked. He never said, Jeff, did you stop smoking a pipe? He never asked. It was not his business. He just held up a mirror. Mm-hmm. He gave me an opportunity to view myself against a different emotional background. And I was intelligent enough to step up. He didn't have to instruct me, cigarettes, smoking, pipes, give you lung cancer, give you tongue cancer, give you lip cancer. He didn't have to tell me. He just created an experiential moment where I could realize something that I already knew. I knew smoking was bad, but I didn't realize what I knew. And that's a common problem in therapy. How do you move from the land of knowing to the land of realizing? And you do that by virtue of the experiences you live better than from the information that you get. Information is not a superhighway to realizing. Living change, living an experience helps us to create a string of states that form the essence of our identity. We have a number of experiences of being effective, being effective, being effective. I'm an effective person. We have a number of experiences of being motivated, motivated, motivated. I'm a motivated person. So what Erickson would do was create a chain of pearls. Here's a pearl, here's a pearl, here's a pearl, and suddenly you would string these pearls into a necklace and it would be you. And so Erickson was working what some people say is on unconscious levels. But really, when we study contemporary social psychology and the way in which people are influenced by things that are outside of their awareness, where they don't realize the cue and they don't even realize the response. People are influenced outside of their awareness. A simple social psychology experiment, when you go to a restaurant, make sure that you have a waiter who's thin. Because statistically speaking, when people sit down at a restaurant and the waitress is obese, you order more food.
Really?
You don't realize why you're doing that. But when they research how people respond unconsciously to cues in the environment, people respond without recognizing what it was that caused the response. And so these effects are now widely studied in social psychology. I think more important than taking a class in hypnosis is to have a foundation in understanding social psychology, which is now readily available. There's tens of thousands of studies that demonstrate how people respond to things that are outside of their awareness. And that research did not exist when Erickson was practicing. So he was doing experiments. Like, one of the things that Erickson would do is choose something. Like he would choose the direction of voice. Mm-hmm. One direction, one direction, one direction, one direction. Could people respond to the direction of voice? Was the direction of voice alone enough to cause a response? Well, the president of the American Psychiatric Association is visiting Erickson. Erickson's working with a subject who is known to have motion sickness. That's a given. So Erickson does a neutral induction, and as he's doing the neutral induction, talking about neutral things, he is moving from side to side, replicating what you might feel if you were on a boat in the ocean, and the boat is gently moving from side to side. And Erickson is speaking neutral things. The man has his eyes closed. He can't see that Erickson is moving. The man develops motion sickness. And Erickson is demonstrating that the direction of voice alone can cause a physiological response. Now, at that time, we didn't have the words mind-body connection. Uh-huh. And so he is demonstrating something. And this was the intellectually a part of Erickson that I have tried to really work with. In psychotherapy, as I learned it, in much coaching, as I see it being taught, it's my mouth to your ears, your mouth to my ears. The coach is just speaking, using words. Mm-hmm. And words are such a fraction of the total communication. And it would be like a painter who was only painting using the color blue. Well, when you have a palette and you have so many colors, you explore what can you do. So Erickson was never credited with this, but he was an explorer of the potentials of human communication. How can you use posture? How can you use gesture? How can you use proximity? How can you use the tone of your voice? How can you use the tempo of your voice? Mm-hmm. How can you use different aspects of hesitations, of pauses? What is the total palette that a communicator has at his disposal to help another human being realize his potential? And we have unfortunately overemphasized words without recognizing that we can use space in a way, we can use movement in so many different ways, and we can communicate in a way that represents what I would call limbic communication. Mm-hmm. This is the human brain, this is the spinal cord, cerebellum, which is blinking, breathing, digestion, your reptilian brain, the thumbs, your limbic system, your emotional social brain, the amygdala, the accelerator, and the medial front, the gray matter, the medial frontal precortex, the brakes. Now, the accelerator is greater than the brakes. And so people often get into trouble because their emotions are supercharged. Now, what is limbic communication? Well, limbic communication is the way that animals communicate. We're an animal. Animals communicate, birds communicate, lizards communicate, fish communicate, all mammals communicate, but we don't use they don't use symbolic verbal communication. They use limbic communication. Now, that limbic communication is part of our evolutionary sociobiology, and it's not about the words. The words are a great evolutionary advantage. They help us to, create the things that we have done in humanity. But when we're trying to reach states that are limbically organized, let's use the communication patterns that are used to influence emotion. And these are the communication patterns that are basically used by dogs and birds and lizards and fish and other mammals. And so, and when you think about that, when you begin to recognize that, suddenly you realize the world of art. Art, be it theater, be it movies, poetry, choreography, architecture. Art is essentially limbic communication. Coaches know this much about influencing people. Therapists know this much about influencing people. Mm-hmm. Artists know how to reach the human heart. So one of my projects is about emotional impact. And how do you create emotional impact? By modeling, one of the great contributions of NLP, modeling art. So what Bandler and Grinder did was they took Erickson, they went ching, 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 divided Erickson into some components, and then showed you how you could begin to assume those components of excellence. Well, now what I've been doing is I've been taking art, ching, 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 and I've been trying to look at the limbic communication that painters do, poets do, movie directors, especially movie directors do, because that's the most complex form of art. Now, if you go to my website, psychotherapyvideo.com, you'll see a lecture that I did for coaches, businessmen in Milan, Italy. It's in English, but it's about this project of emotional impact. How do you understand how to take something from one field, art, and bring it into our field, coaching, counseling, and use the techniques that artists use at the moment you want to reach the human heart. If you just want to explain something to people, just talk. If you want people to realize something different, rely on art and your knowledge of art. We're not using our palette. We've seen hundreds of movies, but we don't understand the grammar. We've read hundreds of books, but we don't understand the linguistic apparatus that the writer is using. He knows what he's doing. He knows the grammar of writing. The poet knows the grammar of poetry. The painter knows the grammar of painting. The movie maker knows the grammar of movie making. And we, as communicators, if we want to reach the human heart, we need to go there. So in closing, websites. You can go to ericksonbiography.com, learn about what I'm doing in putting together this biography. You can go to psychotherapyvideo.com. You can see my coaching course and some of my lectures. You can go to erickson-foundation.org, and you can see this movie about Dr. Erickson, the artistry of Milton Erickson, and see a lot. We have tremendous number of resources for those of you who understand English. So Andre, it's our time is up, and I'm sorry because it feels like we're just getting started.
Yes, yes.
I hope that my enthusiasm has been infectious, and I thank you very much for the opportunity and wish you very well in your project. It's a very important project, educating people and doing the online work that you're doing. So really, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jeff. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And